Tragedy, like cheap jump scares and jarring violins, makes good bedfellows with horror. Whether it's the protagonist or just some poor NPC, horror games have some of the saddest characters going. Still, there are some who suffer appalling fates even by the genre's standards. Heavy spoilers are to follow because I'm Sai, this is WhatCulture, and these are the 10 most tragic characters in horror games. Number 10, The Prophet, Darkest Dungeon. It's difficult not to find yourself appreciating the vibe of Darkest Dungeon's narrator with his constant melodramatic voice lines delivered to perfection by Wayne June. It's equally true, however, that the game's intro cutscene alone makes it clear that he's done terrible, terrible things. And of course, the narrator couldn't keep these horrors secret. One of the game's reoccurring bosses, the sonorous or fulminating or gibbering prophet, depending on the difficulty, is a man who the narrator describes as a, quote, filthy, toothless miscreant who, quote, boasted an uncanny knowledge of my ambitions and procrastinated publicly that, left unchecked, I would soon unleash doom upon the world. Just a normal thing that normal people say. This prophet seemingly foresaw the narrator's true ambition to bring great Lovecraftian evil to bear and tried to desperately rally others to the cause of stopping him. And whilst the narrator tried everything he could to kill the prophet mysteriously returned after every murder attempt. The origins of the prophet and exactly how much he knew on first appearing are unclear, but his ultimate fate is perhaps the most horrific of all Darkest Dungeon bosses. To be tricked into witnessing the true extent of what lurks in the shadows, whereupon he tears his own eyeballs out and flees into the depths of the ruins. He seems rather unwilling to fight in the conventional sense in his boss battles, but the player pursues and kills the prophet, whether permanently or not is actually unclear, as yet another harrowed victim of the narrator's machinations. Number 9, The Chapel Dweller, Bloodborne. NPCs are tricky in Soulsborne games. Sometimes they have enigmatic side quests that are either hidden behind obscure items, or they have to be found 7 times over the course of the game in different locations in order to continue them. Or, both. Other times, they just want to kill you. One of the cruelest tricks From Software ever pulled with an NPC was the creation of the Chapel Dweller. A curious soul the player encounters on reaching Odin Chapel, the Dweller suggests this location as a safe place to send any survivors you might meet. There are a select few of them in the game, and they can be sent here after you have this conversation. The trouble is, there's a choice of 2 destinations, the chapel or Yosefka's clinic. Yosefka is presented as a charming female doctor as contrasted with the Chapel Dweller's slightly sinister demeanour. You might be inclined to mistrust the Chapel Dweller, but opting for the clinic instead leaves the survivor at the mercy of imposter Yosefka, who brutally experiments upon and transforms anyone sent to her. The Chapel Dweller might seem a little ominous, but it's actually perhaps the only truly friendly and innocent character in the whole game, genuinely overjoyed to see each survivor arrive at the chapel and even expresses a wish to be friends with the hunter when the night is over. Most tragically of all is when the player does kill him, his last words reveal just how genuine he was, expressing that he wished only to help people. Poor sod. Number 8, Lisa Trevor, Resident Evil 2002 Remake. The Resident Evil series has seen countless characters, from major players to the most seemingly unimportant NPCs, fall victim to various viruses. Typically, they transform into horrific abominations in the process. William Birkin's gigantic eyeball arm comes vividly to mind. And as villainous as some of the series' antagonists undoubtedly are, few of them deserve to become a giant blob monster. It's a fate that neither you or I, or really anybody, would ever want. Kinda makes you wonder why they inject themselves in the first place, but that's besides the point. What's worse though are the characters who don't inject themselves and are in fact largely innocent. With this in mind, Lisa Trevor's case may have been the most horrendous in the franchise so far. Lisa and her mother Jessica Trevor were kidnapped and imprisoned in the depths of the Spencer mansion, detained and experimented upon to test the effects of the progenitor virus, which would eventually become the T-virus. Lisa's mother was killed in an attempt to escape her captivity, leaving her young daughter, who was more profoundly affected by the virus, to gradually lose much of her humanity. After years of this torture, and with her virus-ravaged body and mind posing considerable threats, those leading the research ordered her death, but she was denied even that peace when she kept returning to life. When the player encounters her in Resident Evil, she's a mutated being who is able to sponge enormous damage. She pursues the player in the winding underground until her boss battle, in which the practical approach is to push away each of the 4 pillars around the room, thus revealing the grave of her mother, Jessica Trevor. The sight causes the still grief-stricken creature that was once Lisa to jump into the crevice below, shouting, "Mother!" Cool, nightmare fuel. Number 7, Albus, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. Oftentimes in the Castlevania series, it's quite easy to tell who your enemies are. And I'm not talking about those damn Medusa heads in the first game, but I mean, they can get to However, in Order of Ecclesia, one character is painted as something of a villain, only to reveal themselves to be a noble and self-sacrificing hero. Albus is a gifted member of the Order of Ecclesia, a 19th century group committed to the cause of banishing Dracula. At the time in which the game is set, their primary weapon is Dominus, a series of 3 glyphs believed to hold the power to defeat the vampire. Harnessing glyphs, however, is a power only available to protagonist Shanoa, who is tasked with absorbing Dominus only for Albus to interrupt the ritual that would allow her to do so. Leaving the group and absconding with Dominus, it seems Albus has stolen the power for his own awful ends, but his true motives are revealed to be anything but nefarious. The true ending of the game reveals that Albus is Shanoa's adoptive elder brother and that he took the glyph so that she wouldn't need to bear it. Unlike Shanoa though, Albus cannot truly channel glyphs, and so Dominus, revealed to have been created from Dracula's own power, corrupts him. We only learn this after we're forced to fight and kill him, but this protective elder brother sacrifices himself to safeguard Shanoa. Number 6, The Highwayman, Darkest Dungeon 2. Players of the first game in the series would be forgiven for simply considering the Highwayman to be a violent rogue. He's one of the best damage-dealing heroes, eschewing any supportive skills for the ability to deal a lot of both ranged and melee damage with his pistol and knife. Here, there's only one of each class, making them individual characters rather than simple archetypes. They also have backstories that players gradually are introduced to chapter by chapter as they visit shrines of reflection. Being the macabre series that Darkest Dungeon is, everybody's story is tragic, but the poor Highwayman's may be the worst of them all. It begins with him escaping prison, but seemingly resolving to put his criminal past behind him. Hiding from guards, he's forced to barely survive on rats beneath the city's streets. In this sorry state, he's coerced, ill and starving, into turning back to crime and robbing a stagecoach, offered a handsome prize for doing so. The player takes control of him during the battle with the guards and the stagecoach itself. On approaching the coach afterwards, he discovers that a child and its mother were killed by stray shots during the attack, specifically his shots. The story's narrator tells us he felt the cold chains of remorse tighten around his heart. Guilt was a pursuer he could never outrun, a prison he could never escape. In a twisted world of Lovecraftian horrors, the Highwayman's tragedy is all too human, all too real. Number 5, The Baker Family, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. The Bakers are some of the most nightmarish characters the Resident Evil series has ever produced. The son Lucas is ostensibly human, but the horrific and sadistic games he tortures his captives with are awful to behold. Then there are the bug shenanigans of Marguerite, and who could forget the incident with the police officer and the shovel-wielding Baker patriarch Jack? You know, that one we can't show and have to blur because of YouTube. Just, you can picture it's bad. Needless to say, this isn't a family you'd want to live next door to, and stopping over for dinner would probably be a huge mistake. But as the game's plot unfolds, it's surprising just how much you grow to pity them. This was once a compassionate, caring family. Yeah, Jack used to drink a bit, but they weren't outright monsters, except maybe Lucas. He was always a nutjob. The point is, the Bakers simply wanted to care for the little girl Evelyn and wife of protagonist Mia when they found them after a tanker crash in the bayou. In return, they were utterly consumed by the mold wielded by Evelyn and her surprising pseudo-science powers. By the time that the player encounters them, they have as little control as the Ganados of Resident Evil 4 and just as much inclination to decapitate or disembowel you with whatever they have to hand. Number 4, Anthony, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. Cult classic survival horror epic Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem is largely remembered for 2 things: its ingenious sanity meter and the sanity effects that befall the player if it fell too low, and its brilliant time-hopping narrative. Granted, those might be 3 things, but I'm just too sad about Anthony's fate to be picky about that. Protagonist Alex Roivas discovers the Tome of Eternal Darkness in her murdered grandfather's mansion. The book tells the story of a select few from across the centuries who have battled the encroaching darkness. One chapter featuring Anthony takes place in the year 814 AD. Anthony is a messenger who is given a vital missive for the Emperor Charlemagne, which turns out to be a magical curse that was intended to kill him. The suspicious Anthony opens the package and is afflicted by the curse in his stead. The player then searches through Oubliette Cathedral as Anthony steadily decomposing as a result of the magic. He battles undead horrors and Lovecraftian nightmares as he does so, despite the fact that he's scarcely able to walk later into his chapter. He succumbs as he finds Charlemagne deep in the cathedral, already dead. His harrowing ordeal, all for nothing, Anthony is forced to rise again in a later chapter, where the player must fight the tormented messenger as the monk Paul Luther. Yeah, take that, me of the past. Number 3, Isaac Clarke, Dead Space. Were Isaac Clarke to make a bid for the most tragic fictional character in any medium ever award, that's a stacked category, but he's a shoo-in. In the original Dead Space alone, he faces an unimaginable gauntlet of horrors as an engineer who must fight through the aftermath of the necromorph outbreak aboard the SSS Ishimura. He experiences the brutal deaths of colonists and colleagues alike, deteriorating mentally under the influence of everything, and the marker replica in the process, culminating in the awful revelation that his girlfriend Nicole, the chief medical officer of the Ishimura, ended her own life as the Scourge originally began. These events continue to haunt Isaac in the sequel Dead Space 2, set just years after the first title on a space complex dubbed the Sprawl. Isaac's knowledge of the marker is manipulated by Earth Gov director Tiedemann, who manufactures another one, and so a fresh necromorph outbreak begins on the Sprawl. After fighting off a ghastly apparition of Nicole at the game's climax, Isaac then faces another sequel full of horror on the planet of Tau Volantis in Dead Space 3, this time battling a living moon and the origins of the markers, and the necromorphs just caps everything the unfortunate man had to deal with off. I was going to say nicely, but whatever the reverse of nicely is. Number 2, Mono, Little Nightmares 2. The wider world of Little Nightmares is an aptly named realm indeed. The series revolves around the concept of steering a small, largely defenseless and childlike character through a series of stages inhabited by warped creatures. Whether you're creeping through an eerie wood or a huge ship's kitchen, you're always just a missed step away from being captured and eaten, or any number of other grim yet ambiguous fates besides. Your enemies are of the human but strange and distorted type, and all the more unnerving for it. In Little Nightmares 2, Six encounters Mono, an enigmatic boy with a bag over his head. Bad hair day? Yeah, we've all been there. In this sequel, the pair strive to unravel the mystery of the Pale City, the tower, and the eerie transmission emanating from it. They battle a shotgun-wielding hunter, that neck-waving monster of a teacher, the abominations in the hospital, and more, both together and apart. In a rare moment of Little Nightmares combat, Mono dispatches a group of sinister bullies to rescue his new friend. In the game's shocking finale, however, we witness Six betraying Mono, catching him as he leaps for a distant platform in the unstable tower, and then letting him fall. Mono, knowing he's doomed, is trapped in what remains of the Black Tower, beset by the transmission, and losing his mind until it seems becomes the very Thin Man who menaces the pair. The surprise and the creeping inevitability of his fate is matched only by that of the runaway kid from the original game's DLC. And number 1, James Sunderland, Silent Hill 2. The Silent Hill series deals with true psychological horror with the shocking and lasting effects that traumatic experiences can have on our perception of the world around us. It's these very experiences that lead to the appearance of the Pyramid Head of Silent Hill 2. The game's protagonist, James Sunderland, is a widower searching Silent Hill for hints of his wife Mary, who he believes may still be there. The town had great meaning for the pair, and James searches, carrying terrible grief and something of a lingering guilt for Mary's death. At Silent Hill, he meets a woman named Maria, the image of his wife, only to see her killed by Pyramid Head, although she appears again in Toluca prison. The trauma and the encounters have a further heavy impact on Sunderland's psyche, particularly as Maria seems to represent the wife that Sunderland pines for. As the game goes on, our haunted protagonist is able to piece together more of his memories until finally arriving at the realization that he himself killed Mary. He suffocated her in her bed, tormented by her long illness and his growing helplessness and frustration. Couple this with two of the possible endings, Rebirth, in which a desperate James tries to revive Mary's body at the Church of the Rebirth, and Maria, in which James ultimately hopes to leave town with Maria, only for her to start showing signs of illness, and it's plain that Sunderland's torment is a never-ending loop. And that's just before taking into account the somewhat recently revealed truth that Silent Hill 2 Remake represents James experiencing the same events over and over for at least 2 decades. Of course, whether or not James deserves it all is and has always been up for debate, as is the nature of Silent Hill 2's story and themes, but it doesn't stop it from being a laundry list of terrors.